I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Willamette Valley Winemaker special series. Across these 6 episodes recorded in December 2022, we'll be exploring the modern Willamette Valley winemaker scene in the company of 6 producers, with guests chosen to reflect a range of locations, production scales, and philosophies. Undoubtedly the most up-to-date exploration of Willamette Valley winemaking available anywhere in podcast format. Subscribe to Interpreting Wine to be alerted when new series episodes go live. We continue the Oregon Winemaker series today in the company of Doug Tunnell of House Vineyards. Doug gives us a House Vineyards update before taking us into adaptations to the challenging 2020 vintage. We talk virtual learnings online during the pandemic, geology at Ribbon Ridge. We take a deep dive into their plantings and the Brickhouse yeast DNA research before Doug gives us a 2022 vintage overview, talks growing export markets, and looks ahead for 2023. Enjoy.
In the last 3 years, we've had a couple of additions and a couple of subtractions, but our core group has really remained pretty steady. I mean, we've really brought along, for example, Savannah Mills, who is our niece, and she has been working here now for 9 years, but we've now brought her along up to the position and the responsibility of being assistant winemaker. And so she's been doing a great job with that in the last couple of years. It's been a new range of responsibilities that she's really taken on and done a great job. And then the other real constant is Carrie Ann Irwin, a young woman who is our goddaughter. Her parents are dear friends of ours, and especially of my wife's, who have known her mother since college days kind of thing. And Carrie is sort of our organizer. She sometimes jokes that she's our token millennial, but she's really more than that, because she is very savvy with all the technology of the day and keeps us organized and all moving forward in a very efficient way, which is, everybody needs that. And certainly both my wife and I do in running this little business that we have. We've then got a couple of guys that are helping with sales, Brian and Jacob, and they're great. They're great at telling the story of Brickhouse and how we got here and what we do. So that's the core, along with my wife and myself, of course. And it's been really a very interesting, at times difficult. I mean, back almost 3 years ago now, when the pandemic hit, of course, like all wineries and many restaurants and many other businesses, we had to shut down, and that presented us with pretty interesting series of decisions. But we got through it, managed to do fine. And in fact, 2021, from a business point of view, revenue point of view, was one of our best years yet. I mean, we really kind of knocked it out of the park. I don't know why. I think maybe because people were so fed up with being cooped up that they wanted to, break out and let's go buy some more wine and have a party. Something like that was happening, and we benefited from it. So it was great. So we're doing well. We're fine. We have a great team. We had a wonderful harvest this year. And if it's appropriate, I'd like to talk more about that, because it was a knockout.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I think we can obviously we'll take the conversation forward and have a virtual conversation this time. But I do just want to sort of say on the record, really, your original episode 384, as I've just checked, I think really was one of the most popular ones of the series that I put together when I was down there in the Willamette Valley, and that was a real, I think, highlight of all the years that I've been doing the podcast. And it was in hindsight, it was really fortunate to be able to capture all of those stories, really, and have them for people to listen to and to kind of keep them going, I guess you would say. I think one thing that that came up actually in the immediate conversation I've just had with Brianne Day was actually something that you hinted at there just now, actually, Doug. So it was that kind of, restaurants are closed, tasting rooms are closed, potentially, quite a more lucrative or certainly higher end route to market, all of a sudden sort of closed off. And I'm just curious, and was there a sort of a shift? Was there a sort of conversation, I guess, that had to take place with maybe the the winery club members or the people who were buying direct about maybe these are some other different wines that maybe they weren't used to seeing or weren't used to trying, and maybe this was a good chance to get into some of those.
Well, it was doubly challenging because, of course, in 2020, the 2020 harvest was fouled by a bunch of wildfires that, cast smoke throughout our vineyards. Well, the smoke was intense enough that it affected the skins of the grapes, the red grapes especially. And so it changed everything about the way we made the wine that year. And we didn't do any reserve wines. We felt that it was really important to preserve our quality standards for our reserves. Mm-hmm. So we didn't do any reserves. We did two actually non-vintage Pinot Noirs, where we took the core of 2020 and blended them back with some 2019. That was one bottling. And then the second bottling was blending it forward with some 2021. And actually, that really worked out well for us. What it did was salvage the harvest. We had, for red wines, we had these two Pinot Noirs. They were 100% Pinot Noirs, 100% estate grown, but we couldn't put a vintage date on them. So we redid the price and adjusted the price accordingly. And while we didn't, reap the benefits of a real vintage Pinot Noir, we did at least have Pinot Noir wine to sell that was in fact estate grown, brick house, as always. So that was how we coped with that particular problem, which was really one we had never experienced before. It was a real new thing around the valley. So, and that's kind of in addition to the pandemic. So to introduce a new wine like that, to our direct customers was really difficult because most of them couldn't or didn't want to come here and actually taste and talk about it. So we relied a lot on our distributors. And they had to really change the way they did business too with the pandemic, as I think all distributors did. With our distributors particularly are, for the most part, geared for on-premise, we say, or restaurant sales. They're really good at restaurant sales, and they had to shift to start serving many more of the wine shops around in their territories, because that was the only way they get the wine out there. The restaurants were closed, and the wine shops were at least able to operate on a pickup basis, if you will, buy wine online, pick it up. So everybody shifted, everybody moved in 2020 and 2021, and it was unsettling. But I'll tell you what, we learned a lot. And as people say, well, what were your strategies? We said, we're making it up as we go along, right? So that's what happened, and it was really quite a ride, but it worked. It's people, if people want wine, they're going to get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, and I think this, as you say, the sort of the two forces there again, the 2020 challenges of the vintage added to the challenges of the year, and I think that I even was thinking the other day the number of Instagram lives and kind of online events that just completely exploded, and used to take over my news feed at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock. It was almost like programmatic scheduling, on the hour, on the half hour.
Right.
I think that must, point to a picture of greater connection, really, between a lot of brands, a lot of, as you say, distributors, importers in the UK, And on the other side, people learning. I think that was it. And as I say, I certainly noticed that. Through things like the Willamette Valley series, people were really engaging with content. They had the extra time, and I think that a lot of people, who were maybe skirting around wine, they went quite deep into that. Be that through qualifications or more likely through that content.
Well, and there really, as we all know, there wasn't all that much to do during the various lockdowns. I say various because we had several here. I don't know in the UK. I think it was different, but the opportunity to get on a computer screen and talk with your friends and maybe even share the same wine, which we did a number of times, really was like, oh, there's an event. Thank God I can't go out, but I can at least do that, have a virtual dine out, a virtual tasting.
Yeah. Incredible. And it's something again that I've sort of touched on once or twice in the series already so far. But I'm curious, because I'm talking about the consumer learning. I certainly went into that kind of learning mode as well. And curious, did you come across learnings or conversations or tastings or kind of sharings that you think maybe actually, okay, this has informed something, a seed was planted during that time that's actually maybe influenced you going forward?
Yeah, and from my point of view, both ways, because not only did we do a number of tastings with new groups, so perhaps new customers, right, to talk about the wine and sip with them and discuss, and they were able to ask questions, and it was a two-way street, but also I sat in on a number of tastings with some really experienced wine tasters and writers and critics, and was able to, because I normally try to go to France every year, at least one time, to Burgundy, and I wasn't able to do that, but I could sit in on some of these tastings. It was like the next best thing to a plane ticket, right? And really enjoyed it and learned a lot about the wines in the various villages and the rest. So it was, there were some upsides to all of that. And I think we maybe all learned a little bit about some of the virtues of the virtual world, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, interestingly, I'm actually very happy that I feel like I've got a totally different context, a different point of view on Oregon, since we spoke. Yeah. Really, because I have worked a couple of times now quite in-depthly with your neighbors to the north. So, with Washington State, and actually, really getting into things like the Missoula floods and, revisiting that Pacific Northwest coastline, and what the mountains, what that protection gives to Washington State, and then of course where that then comes down and has influenced Oregon, and have already spoken to the Missoula floods, and even with Scott Neal already today, talking about the heart-shaped boulder that gives his winery its name was actually an erratic from the Missoula flood. So I think definitely myself and my audience are now maybe ready to talk a bit more in depth about the geology and that you sit on there, and that you're experiencing there. And,
I don't remember, Lawrence, if we talked before when you were here about, but the fact is that here on Ribbon Ridge we were an island in the flood, if you will. We were just, the flood waters came up at maximum height to around 380 feet or so, which is the elevation at the very bottom of my vineyard. So I like to say, we would have been beachfront property here on our little island. And so, but I guess I'm glad I missed all that, because it would have been pretty scary. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, and does that therefore, I mean, again, just to super high level. I mean, the Missoula floods were the largest known movement of water in the history of the planet, and I guess even though Oregon was relatively far down in terms of and the Willamette Valley was relatively far down in terms of the course of that. I mean, it still must have been particularly tumultuous for the soil and for the for the landscape there. And I'm just curious, does that being on that sort of beachfront property is that something quite unique that actually gives a sort of a one-off combination of soils that you're working with?
Well, actually, because the floodwaters stopped at the bottom of our vineyard, they didn't really impact our soils. There were other influences, of course, that did on Ribbon Ridge. The ridge itself is all homogeneous. It's really one soil series, all of which is marine sediment. So eons ago, it was the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, the entire ridge. And actually, that has really emerged as kind of a very positive thing, because when we talk about the viticultural area of Ribbon Ridge, we can talk in some pretty specifics about having the same soil type. So, and that is not the case with a lot of viticultural areas in the valley. There are some that are very different, have very range of different soils, but we're all of one family, if you will. Which it also helps us with regard to farming, because we can share a lot of information and we come across the same kind of problems and the same kind of solutions. So,
yeah, and I may well be sort of stating the obvious then. I mean, so is the ridge does follow that more or less that height, that 380 feet height that you mentioned there?
Yeah, around for the highest level of the flood. Yeah.
Okay.
And the ridge itself, to give you an idea, the ridge goes up to about 600 feet, something like that. So we're talking about roughly 300 feet in between, which were soils unaffected. But that's actually where all of the vineyards are on the ridge at this point.
Okay. Yeah. Super interesting. And I guess as well, what would be helpful is just to give us a snapshot of the vineyards, that vineyard area that you have now, and of course updating us. So I don't know if there's been any changes since 2020.
Yeah, obviously the terroir remains the same. We are sitting. Well, our winery, for example, and which is kind of right in the middle of the vineyard, our vineyard, is at 440 feet of elevation, and then the vineyard goes up to about 600, and down, as I say, to about 380, something like that. And it's shaped a little bit like a bowl. It's sort of facing southeast. When we, on a clear day, look out across the valley, we're looking at Mount Jefferson, which is a volcano in central Oregon, actually. So we're looking southeast, and that's the way that the drainage, the water flows off of our farm in that direction as well. So that's really the snapshot. We're in the middle right now of replanting a lot of Gamay Noir, because we planted Gamay Noir with on its own roots, and then we discovered in time that phylloxera invaded and slowly began to destroy the Gamay roots, and so we've had to work on replanting a lot of that, and it's cut into our Gamay production, sadly. But we'll get back. We'll get there. We've got the plants, many of them in the ground, and we've got more on the way for the spring. So that's been a big project for us over the last couple of years, and we have also replanted some Pinot Noir, and that's coming on now with some fruit that is really very promising. The one upside to replanting, the downside is expense. When we planted that Gamay, the plants cost me 65 cents a plant, and today they are $5.50. So, wow. I mean, it's really, and then to say nothing of the wire, the posts, the trellis, all of that has just gone through.
The labor, I guess, as well.
And the labor as well. So wine. Vineyard owner is always going to be whining about stuff like that. But the good news is we get to choose new clones. And so even though we're replanting Gamay, we're replanting with different clones that are acknowledged, at least in the French literature, as being very high quality. And so I'm really looking forward to working with the fruit as a high quality Gamay Noir. Gamay has become really popular around here. And it really does well. It grows really well in our soils. I think it takes to our climate as well, which is a little bit like Beaujolais, a little warmer on the warmer side than Burgundy, the Pinot Noir vineyards there. And the other thing that's interesting to me, and I don't know how it plays in, but we have a lot of silica in our sediment. Which is it's a volcanic remnant. But when you look at the soil, when it's very dry, you can see it almost glistens. There are little sparkly pieces of mineral, and that's the silica content, which of course is probably a remnant from what was the bottom of the ocean, right? Beach sand. And that is a common factor with the vineyards of Beaujolais. And I'm just curious. I've never seen anyone do the research, but I really think there might be an important connection with Gamay Noir there because it does so well here and in Beaujolais as well. Silica may play some sort of mysterious role. Don't know, but just curious about that.
Well, yeah, I guess a lot of learning, a lot of knowledge acquisition is observational as well, isn't it? Having the time to kind of make those connections. The
other thing that we've done, Lawrence, since you were here, we've continued our research in yeasts. We use exclusively indigenous yeast for fermentations. We've never used a cultured yeast. And so for that reason, we started to look at DNA profiles of the yeast that dominates our fermentation. We started that in 2015. We've now accumulated all those years of data, DNA fingerprints, and we've discovered that there is one strain that is persistent year in, year out, vintage to vintage, and that is the strain that dominates and finishes our fermentations of all three varieties of Pinot, Chardonnay, and Gamay Noir that we grow. We've also found that yeast, same strain, on the skins of our grapes. We've found it in the bark of our oak trees. We've got stand oaks nearby. We've searched for it and found it now very, very near in a neighboring vineyard as well. And that's where we're currently with this research, as far as we've gone. We're trying to establish what's the footprint of this particular yeast. Could it be this is a ribbon ridge yeast? Could it be this is a brick house yeast? What we know is we've run it through the DNA data bank of the National Institutes of Health here in the United States. They have millions and millions of DNA profiles, and there is no match to that yeast strain. And so it is unique, and it's something that we are really excited about. And because these are the organisms that make the wine. I mean, I might take credit, but it's really the yeast that are doing the work, right? So it's pretty exciting for us, and we're really determined to try to preserve that yeast. And we certainly don't bring any other yeast into our facility here or use it in any way. So that's another thing that we pursued over these last 3 years as well.
Yeah, incredible, and as I think always happens when you ask the question, new things come up that I don't think we've covered before on the podcast, and I'm just curious, would you mind kind of giving us a bit of a snapshot of that research project? Who is involved, and,
Sure.
and maybe even taking us back to the start, because I do remember we spoke somewhat about yeast back in 2020. So was the project already underway back then?
So we started fermenting in this facility. 1994 was the first fermentation, and from that time on, because of the way that I learned about winemaking, I worked with people to learn that always used indigenous yeasts. Well, from 94 on in this winery, we have always relied on indigenous yeasts. And at some point, in 2012 or 13, I think, we began to think, well, these we really should know more about this, because every year they're doing the job. It's successful. We've never, touch wood, had a stuck fermentation. We don't have issues. What is the nature of this yeast strain? So around 2015, we learned that it was now, at that time, became viable and affordable to have DNA samples profiled. And so we connected with a biologist at Linfield University near here, and he helped us and sort of outlined a program that we followed for examining and searching for this yeast strain. We had input from a number of people, including a really lovely professor at the University of Florence, a man by the name of Duccio Cavalieri, who has done a lot of yeast research for Italian producers, especially in Chianti. And so Duccio was also helpful in he was the one who said, look, if you're going to do this, you need to think about 5, 6, 7 years. This is a long-term process. And he sort of guided us in that way too. So we began taking samples. Those samples we sent to 2 different labs. One is a commercial lab in California here called ETS, and they are a special, very high-end wine laboratory that does all kinds of stuff, but they're very good at DNA analysis. And then the second lab was at Oregon State University. Linfield University just doesn't have the facility to be able to do that. So our biologist friend from Linfield was able to connect with Oregon State and run our samples through their laboratory, where they have the capacity to do the analysis. So, as I say, this has been going on now for years. We just met with him a couple of weeks ago, because this year at Harvest, one thing we did, again, trying to establish, where are these yeasts? What's the footprint of this strain? And so we set up pup tents in 3 neighboring vineyards. We had sterile buckets in each of the pup tents. We picked grapes from the vineyards, each of those vineyards, and then did bucket fermentations, completely apart from the wineries. We didn't want to go into the wineries because we didn't know what kind of strains were being used there. And so the upshot was 2 out of the 3 bucket fermentations didn't work out, in the sense that they didn't produce enough yeast for us to analyze. The third did, in fact. And the interesting thing is that result corresponds very closely, if not almost identically, with the yeast strain that we know is existent here in our winery. And so I could go on, but at this point, we're still trying to analyze the results of that. One thing that was interesting to me, and I'll cut it off, but we, as I mentioned, have found a real population of this strain in the bark of the oak trees on our farm. And it so happens that the pup tent that we sent up with our neighbor's vineyard was the one that was near a forest that had oak trees in it. And I'm really curious, and this is going to now be next year's project, is to try to establish if there is, in fact, that connection, not only on our farm, we know there is, but if that was why that other fermentation was successful and ended up showing us the same strain. So there's a lot of oak trees on Ribbon Ridge. Yeah, so I've only got 3 pup tents, but we may have to really expand all of this, because there's a good deal of territory we might want to cover.
Yeah, I love it. And final question, because I know there's lots that you also want to talk about here, but I'm just curious. And so, what is the kind of scope of a project like that? I mean, is this being driven by yourself and by Brickhouse?
Yeah.
And then starting to go out from there, or is there actually some wider points, or some wider connections to be made on? Up
till now, I mean, our biologist is is developing a very good cellar of Brickhouse wines. That's pretty much it. And and for the lab costs and stuff, they're not exorbitant, but we're paying for all of this ourselves. And because obviously it's of great interest to us, and it determines our wines. I mean, it's really critical. Now, if our friend and neighbor whose vineyard turned up the same yeast strain wants to help out, I will encourage that. I haven't gotten around to talking to him about it yet, but we would welcome partners, if you will. So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, and I think just to say, I'm often encouraged, I would say, by Master of Wine students and diploma students. Kind of the the geekier, the more detailed, the more scientific, the better. So I'm sure you'll have some of my listeners reaching out to you after hearing that. So we'll maybe leave the door open for any that want to make contact.
Our biologist told us the other day that he's got a student who's very excited to work as an intern on this. So we'll see where that goes.
Amazing, and I think what feels like a logical place to take it to is where you hinted at really right at the start, Doug, which was talking about 2022 vintage. I mean, I think this is really one of the things that I think interested me about a lot of people in the Willamette Valley, but you yourself, really, somebody who is kind of born and raised there, and has this sort of lifelong connection, and I think appreciation. So when I hear you being sort of taken aback and impressed with a vintage, I want to know more. I want to sort of unpick a little bit more about what that looks like for you nowadays.
Well, Lawrence, I really I try to not overstate vintage, especially before malolactic, but really at any time. But I got to say, this 2022 vintage was one for the books in my view. I've been in the cellar subsequently after the fermentations were done, and again, we haven't finished malo, but the wines are just terrific. The Pinot Noir is tasting really, really well, largely because I think this was a very late vintage, and the weather held. We had a long period of dry, warm weather throughout September and October, and people could pick at will. We weren't being forced by conditions and weather and stuff into picking when we didn't want to. And I love late years. This was a very late year, and the wines. I believe the fruit has in those years a great deal of time to develop all the most beautiful characteristics, and that's what I'm experiencing when I taste in our cellar now. And again, I really don't want to overstate it, but this is an exceptional vintage, and unless something terrible happens, and I don't think that's in the cards. I mean, I think this is going to really be one that people are going to want to watch. 2022.
Yeah, incredible. And then so that those conditions, the no rain, no huge variations of temperature, I guess, around picking, which meant that you had greater control around that picking decision.
Yeah.
What about earlier on in the year though? Was there anything that was happening there that kind of gave some clues about where the vintage might be heading?
So the downside to the vintage, I guess, was particularly with our Chardonnay, because Chardonnay breaks bud first, and in April of this year, we had a couple of days of pretty serious frost, and that really took a toll. I think we lost at least 50 and possibly 60% of our Chardonnay fruit as a result of the frost. But the red wines were less affected. Now, I can't speak about the Chardonnay that we do have, that 40 to 50% that survived. It is really hard to gauge until it gets to be through mallow and a little bit have a little bit more age. But the red wines are the ones that I'm most excited about, for sure.
Well, you heard it here first. 2022 is certainly one to watch. And I think what I can say really, Doug, having been there, I just looking back, I was able to try. Really all of the varieties that you have on the farm when we tasted together, to try the Gamay Noir, to try the Chardonnay, and to try the Pinot, and I think we're lucky enough in the UK to have those wines available there and quite well established. I'm curious, is there have there been many changes in terms of where your wines are kind of being enjoyed, and where you're sending these wines out to since we last spoke?
Yeah, I was going to mention that because that's another big change really over the last 3 years. We have taken to exporting more wine. And it's been kind of fun, and I think we'll continue it. We've expanded and sent some wine to Korea. We've sent some wine to Hong Kong, to Norway, and most importantly to the UK. Now the UK has turned out to be one of our largest markets. Even compared to some of the American distributors, we're shipping and selling more wine in the UK than in many parts of the United States. So that's been really fun and successful. So I hope that next time we get to come and visit London, we can sit down and share a glass.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're not too far from Burgundy, so try to come there on the way in or on the way out. So really, really great catching up, Doug. And I guess invite you to share the name of the importer. And
sure. In the UK, we're represented by A&B Vintners. And they are in London and have been doing a bang-up job for us. And they're also, I should add, wonderful people. We really have a lot of fun doing business with them. Simon Davies and John Arnold are the two principals.
And I've got to say as well, I was lucky enough to take back a bottle of the Evelyn's Pinot Noir. On my last trip, and was able to take that and to share that with some sommelier friends in London, and it went down very well. And
thank you. We have more Evelyns coming. I've got 11 barrels in the cellar right now, and that's going to be the next thing that we bottle very shortly here in the new year.
Okay, incredible. And I really just in closing, welcome you to kind of look ahead to 2023. We're right at the tail end of 2022 now. Just curious what is it that's kind of getting you excited and anticipating for the coming year.
Well, I hesitate to repeat myself, but really the being able to work with the 2022 vintage is exciting. But so is getting the 2021 Evelyn's and Les Dijonais Pinot Noirs in bottle, because these are the first reserve wines that we've produced since 2019 because of the 2020 wildfire situation. So, to be able to come around and now present to our customers some reserve Pinot Noir, I'm looking forward to that. It's been too long since we've been able to do that. And like I say, then moving on, I think 2021 is a fine vintage. It's a really good vintage. So we're very fortunate after a couple of pretty difficult ones, to have 21 and 22 be so promising. And that to me is exciting. That's what I look forward to in this coming year of 2023. I
love it. And just final point, really. where can people find you? Where online or on social media is the best place for people to?
I thought you'd never ask. www.brickhousewines.com, wines with an S on the end.com that's kind of the main spot. And there from there on, we can direct you to the easiest way to find the wine, or we can ship it to you directly. And, that's our hub.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Doug Tunnell of House Vineyards. Please do help to amplify this episode and the series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/530. You can also find links to all 6 series episodes in the description below. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wine Podcast on Twitter. Next time on Interpreting Wine's Oregon Winemaker series in episode 531, I'll be speaking with Pam Walden of Willful Wine. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening to be alerted when that episode goes live. See you then.